mistakes are not really allowed. They're kind of frowned upon. So we're taught to just cover up our mistakes or like really kind of feel ashamed about it.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about GPS. You know GPS?
Yeah, I know GPS. That's inside the car, right? The automobile.
Well, that and also, Google Maps or whatever
Yeah.
maps that you use.
Waze for those that remember.
What? Yeah, so we use that to kind of like navigate where we need to go and things like that. Now, I was driving the other day and I often, as you know, sometimes would just miss the exit or, I really hate it when they tell you too late
Yeah.
because of connection issues. The next thing you know, it's just like, turn here. Where? And it's like, 10 meters behind me. And so I end up having to keep driving, freaking out. I don't know where I'm going. This is really scary. And, I'm on a highway. Next thing you know, I might be down the next city.
Yeah.
And all it does is it calmly says recalculating route. It didn't shout at me and it didn't yell at me and say, you made a mistake, you idiot. You failed. You're doomed. Now you're just going to have to live off in some cave in the middle of nowhere.
That's why I mentioned Waze earlier, WAZE. I used to use this GPS once upon a time, and you could program
Never
it.
heard of that.
You can program it to use very celebrity voices. So you can have someone kind of yell at you for the recalculation part.
Well, okay. Actually, here, there was a guy that was using GPS system with Kureon Shinchang?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of like, you're going to go here next.
Very cute. Yes.
Turn left. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but you get what I mean. Like, that kind of voice.
No, absolutely.
And so it really made me think, like, if we use that kind of approach in our actual lives, how much better would it be for us and for everyone around us? We make mistakes. We make mistakes. It's very normal. We know that in our head, but somehow when it comes to implementing it, we always kind of feel bad for making mistakes or like punish ourselves. And I mean, for me, it's it has a lot to do with my culture and upbringing where mistakes are not really allowed. They're kind of frowned upon. So we're taught to just cover up our mistakes or like really kind of feel ashamed about it.
No, and there's a couple things. The GPS analogy is an interesting one because, so for starters, there are different routes to get to your destination. Some are a lot longer than others. The 53-minute route with all the traffic versus the 35-minute route that, is like kind of a hack. Sometimes though, you're ultimately going to get to your destination one way or the other, however long or short the ride. And then sometimes as you get lost along the way, this is one of the funny things, the old GPS we used to have in your car when we lived in Taiwan.
Oh, yeah.
That GPS was completely out of date. So it didn't matter what route we took. We wound up in like a road that no longer existed, or
that was funny.
Suddenly there's a building that's obstructing our path. And it's like, yeah, well, that GPS is about 10 years old. So sometimes the mapping you have of where you're going just doesn't kind of match the actual context or condition that you're operating in. But yeah, so I think that I like the GPS analogy because often we want to take the shortest, most effective route, but obviously there are different ways to get to where you're going.
Oh, absolutely. And then, it really got me thinking as well. Like I said earlier, because of my upbringing, I tend to freak out or I tend to feel ashamed for mistakes and failures or whatever, because we're often taught that this is what success looks like and it needs to look a certain way. Yes. I think like how we grew up, I don't know about you, but like for me, the blueprint was that we were taught from our parents, like you have to study hard, get good grades, you graduate with honors, get a good job, stable job, doctor, lawyer, dentist, or go the security route, which is, government positions or accountant, teacher, and things like that. And then you just try to not rock the boat. You get married, you have kids, and then the cycle goes on and on and on. That was what success looked like for our parents, and then they would tell us that. And then so internally, we would feel like, that's what I need to do in order to be successful. And any deviation from that then becomes a failure.
Well, I think it's also the baby boomers who were our parents. Their pathway to success was a lot more linear than ours. The economy that they inherited was unprecedented era of prosperity and stability. Opportunities were abundant and kind of easy to grab. Yeah, mind you, my parents went through 2 or 3 recessions, as did yours. But like, there was a lot of actual linearity to their life path. They could actually go from graduating through school, like university, for example, finding a job, finding some sort of steady trajectory, and then having kids, and the house gets involved. And
Mm,
but actually, I had a lot of moments in my childhood where I realized, it wasn't always linear. My dad's business, he was a graphic designer, and that in advertising. And basically, he kind of went under a few times, and my mom had to pick up the slack and get
mm.
back to the workforce. So yeah, but definitely like our version of success now has to be a lot more comfortable with that circuitous kind of more tortured pathway. It's not going to be linear. It's not always going to be predictable. Hence why the GPS analogy is a good one. I think our generation, us millennials and any generation subsequent, they're going to have to be comfortable with that kind of world because that's the sort of volatile world we live in.
Yeah, and I always wonder what our kids' success is going to look like, right? And I think
Mm,
like when they were still really young, I was definitely trying to map it out for them to be like, this is going to be the trajectory of success based on what I understand of, say, like the rise of AI, say, post COVID. But quite frankly, I don't know what it's going to look like down the road. And I need to be able to trust that they will figure it out. Much like how our parents and our parents' parents, each generation had probably had this kind of level of fear of the uncertain,
mm,
but somehow each generation finds a way to figure it out. There are multiple options of how to get somewhere, which
yeah.
is what we covered just now. We talk about how I would run into a building, even though the old
Mm,
map
yeah.
says to go this way, or I would accidentally miss a turn because of connection or because I was talking. Um, you know, if I were to treat the mistake as like freaking out, I'm gonna waste time going all the way back to start again.
Yeah.
But what if I used a kind of open minded approach, right? And every time that I did, just be like, let's just see where this goes. While I wait for it to recalculate the
Mm,
best route, I'm gonna figure out this thing and go off the what's
yeah.
it the unbeaten.
The unbeaten path.
Yeah. And so every time I've done that, I always end up finding something way more interesting
Mm,
or finding a shortcut or a better route that I've never seen before. One of the reasons why I've done so much in my life,
mm,
experienced so much, is something that a lot of people they tell me every time, I reveal bits and pieces of my story.
mm,
They're like, oh my God, there's this and that and that and that.
mm,
I think it's because I'm the youngest, a bit more adventurous to
mm.
be like, let's see where this goes.
Yeah.
Why not?
Definitely, all sorts of interesting research on the last born being the most adventurous and the most eccentric of a trio or duo or
Yep.
four or more siblings, right? And usually it's because the theory mainly is that the older siblings have already fulfilled their niche, their little kind of role or function within the family, and now you're kind of the last one. You're like, okay, well, he's going to be a lawyer, he's going to be a dentist, he's a successful
And I'm
uh,
going to be a dancer.
and now, well, and it's funny because you talked about our childhood, and yours looked a certain way based on your cultural baggage, but mine was like, I remember telling my parents I want to be a pro wrestler, and I was like kind of serious about that for like a hot minute. It was the '90s, the WWE at the time. WWF was all the rage, and then at one point I wanted to be a baker. Baker is kind of a weird term. It's more a pâtissier, which in French is basically means someone who makes pastries.
Isn't that called a baker?
I guess it's a baker. Anyways, when you get to the destination, you'll have that kind of retrospective where you'll be like, well, I got there. I got there somehow. And actually, the destination sometimes doesn't quite look like what you think it
Mm.
was supposed to look like. Now, again, the analogy can only be pushed so far. If you miss your exit on the highway and you're cussing up a storm, like, trust me, trust us, we've been there, right? It's not fun when you actually miss your exit and when you
In the moment,
in the
though.
moment, right? But ultimately, like, you will be recalculated back to where you need to go. And I think that kind of immense frustration is perfectly normal. And you're going to
I'm
encounter,
definitely not one of those people who are so chill. Like, we have friends who are just
mm,
like, we don't need to plan anything. Everything's spontaneous.
mm,
If this
mm,
happens, then we're definitely not that
no,
kind of people. We're like the opposite of that.
yeah,
We're quite high strung, if you will, very regimented, very structured. I
yeah,
like to plan things like months and years in advance
yeah,
if I could. And I will happily throw
mm,
all my blueprints off the table and
yeah,
start again. That's how kind of neurotic I can get. You
mm,
can ask him. He always tells me, he's just like, stop making blueprints
yeah,
already. But I think it's that kind of neurosis that drives this type of ambition. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I needed to really learn to just let my hair down from time to time and
Yes.
be okay with taking some risks. Even
Yeah.
as the youngest child, who's, the more adventurous one, I still have to balance my personality and my characteristics to
Yeah.
be like, hey, try this out. Maybe the hippies were not so
We don't have hippies
no,
anymore.
okay. The
That was
ones who are a bit more
that.
free spirited,
Yeah.
maybe there's something to learn from
Yeah.
them.
Of course, like in the world of psychology, there is such a thing as the planning fallacy. And it's really easy to get caught up in making sure the right blueprint is in place. And that actually might create expectations that will wildly mismatch the reality on the ground. So, some level of planning, some level of this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go is important. But I think that flexibility is crucial. And I think both of us, maybe to kind of get into a slightly more concrete example here, I started out wanting to become an academic historian, wanting to become a professor. And I wound up teaching international school, which I'm still doing now. And then fast forward, I'm teaching psychology. I'm doing a communication podcast with you and doing all sorts of things that are
Mhm.
adjacent to the craft of communicating information to an audience, teaching to an audience of some sort. Ultimately, I'm still at the same place where I started. Like I've always loved being in a room full of people and just getting them fired up about a subject.
Right.
That
Yeah.
was me at 18, 19 years old when I discovered history for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's still me at almost 40 years old,
Yeah.
teaching psychology and other subjects, right? So it's yeah,
It
I
doesn't look like
doesn't look
what
like
you had planned. Like
no.
you thought I remember you always shared with me when we first met, this
Mm,
was like about 7, 8 years
yeah.
ago. You were finishing up your PhD and you were
Mm,
just like, this is, the next step is to get an academic job and then get tenure and then
yeah.
publish a book, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So you had a plan, much like we all do.
Yeah.
But things kind of took a turn, especially during COVID. It was
Yeah.
really hard to get a job in academia.
Yeah.
And of course, it's also extremely competitive. There's
Yes.
just so many things that were not anticipated or
Yeah.
not written in the books that was going to happen. And I think many people would interpret that as failure, that you
Yes.
failed in academia. That's
Yeah.
why you're a teacher now.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
how do you reframe that?
Well, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's had a similar trajectory where he actually he went into the military. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and he had this kind of good part of his life ambition, and ultimately became a teacher and everything like that. And we had a conversation about how do we reframe that. And I think don't focus so much on the job specific professional end goal. Focus on the skill set.
Mm,
Like, have I been able to hone this particular skill? Has this particular skill gotten me to interesting places? Has it allowed me to connect with people, to find meaning and add value
yeah.
to one or more or many people's lives, right?
Mhm.
I think that we often, that linearity we were talking about earlier when it comes to success, it's going to not feel so linear and terrible if you don't get the exact job that you trained for, that you studied for. But I think that we have to find a way to reframe. And for me, it's been like, look, I'm not a professor at a prestigious university, but I get to teach. I get to dive into subjects that I'm passionate about, and I get to tinker with the craft of delivering, information to young audiences and
Yeah.
trying to, enlighten them and pique their curiosity and get them to develop confidence, both academic and, good social emotional competencies. So I get to continue doing
Yeah.
what I kind of set out to do, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is an important reframe that is needed. Like, are you getting to hone or fine tune or practice a set of skills that you find joy and meaning in?
Well, that ultimately is who you are.
Mm,
If you tether your identity to titles, accolades, and those kind of state, you're always going to find it, it's going to be really hard for you mentally, emotionally, and just, I guess, physically, just
yeah.
depending on what your aspirations are, right? But if you tether yourself, your identity to skills and the
Mm,
value that you can bring to the people around you, then the world is like the sky's the limit. You can
yeah.
do so much and you will find so much more fulfillment
Yeah.
because you're giving as opposed to just taking. You're
Of
not
course.
focusing on the self. I had that realization when I stepped away from doing more full-time performing arts. And so I was doing the whole shebang, like going to Broadway, trying to do all the cattle calls, try to make it into different unions and equity,
Mm.
doing all the stuff that I believe was supposed to you're supposed
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
to make it in that world, right? I would produce my own one-woman cabarets in Australia and in New York. And I would stand, I would finish that last note, and I always loved the feeling of
Mm.
just thundering applause, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then as soon as the lights went down, I walked back, the adrenaline and the high came down. I always felt that sense of emptiness.
Yeah.
It was just like, that was cool. And that was obviously, I put a lot of work into that.
Yeah.
And I gave joy, entertainment, laughter to the audience, but then there was just always something missing. So I started to step away from that, not because I don't enjoy performing, I do, but I
Mm.
wanted more. I wanted more out of that experience.
Yeah.
So I think at the time I was focusing on my skills and my accolades and stuff. And now moving into education, coaching, as well as communication space like
Yeah.
this, I feel way more satisfied with
Mm.
what I'm doing with
Yeah.
myself. And even though you know, I'm not like a Broadway star or whatever, it doesn't matter because I'm not tethered to that.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think that our brains require that sort of slow moving, effortful, goal seeking, reward seeking activity. And yeah, there is obviously there's the curtain kind of closes, the performance is over, you delivered that presentation, you finalize that deal, right? And I think that you want to try to maximize those moments in your life because there's a great deal of satisfaction that comes from nailing something you've been really working hard on. Just like, for me in my amateur kind of athletic pursuits, whether it's jujitsu or, the high rocks that we did once upon a time in Shenzhen, it's like that feels great. But I think you want to kind of create a distributed way in which not that you give yourself as many of these big projects all at once. I don't think that's probably not a wise
No,
thing to do.
definitely burnt out from that. I like to do too much.
Yeah. So, but again, knowing that like you have one or more things you're working towards, and it's not so much the final consummation of that reward or that performance. It's really the process, like really falling in love with the process, falling in love with the journey. I know this is going to sound cliched, but a lot of these really fascinating studies of highly successful, top performing athletes, intellectuals, whatever, it's intrinsic joy. It's
Yeah.
falling in love with what you're doing over and over again. This is the big argument of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Creativity, where he documented, this is the guy that came up with the whole flow state concept, but he has a great book on creativity. And he's interviewing, double digit top level performers and business elites and academics that have redefined their fields. And all of them have like a common denominator. They really enjoy what they do. And they just do it it's autotelic,
Mm.
meaning they do it for the sake of doing it.
You were saying that about creativity, right? It's hard to be creative if you're boxing yourself in a
Mm.
very specific trajectory.
Yeah.
You can only be truly creative if you're allowing some messiness.
Yeah.
I think some of the most well-known art
Yeah.
were kind of like a bit of a, you would say shit disturber, like a bit of that,
Mm.
I'm not going to be like everyone else.
Yeah.
And they're going to do like something that's a little bit off the beaten path and all that stuff. And that in turns creates this like, wow, that's
Yeah.
revolutionary. That is amazing, so innovative and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so if you want to be a part of that, right, you do want to be not afraid to rock the boat a little bit.
Yeah. Sure.
Like, think about all if we pull back to kind of, go back in time, I don't think any of our ancestors would have imagined the world as it is now.
Yeah.
Even just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever ago. You don't even
Yeah.
have to go thousands of years behind.
Yeah.
And I really don't believe that it's because everyone did what success looked like.
Well, yeah, I think that that's an interesting thought exercise, especially for us, given where we're from, to think about like about a century and change ago, my ancestor, like my great great grandfather and your great great grandfather, the idea, or great great grandmother, right? The idea that hop on a time machine and be like, so there's this French Canadian guy. Like, no, but it's like it would really completely blow their minds to know where their descendants wind up and what sort of, first of all, what kind of civilization do they inhabit, how technologically advanced it is, but the kinds of opportunities and jobs, the amount of languages you can speak, the sheer amount of money you can make,
Yeah.
and just the places you can travel to. And obviously we do take this world for granted. And yeah, sometimes pausing and realizing that, look, there's a lot more pathways and a lot more little alleys and
Mm.
meandering to find fulfillment. So we talked about the messiness of success and trying to figure out like where one's life is going. And I think that how you put yourself out there, how you communicate, how you navigate any kind of, well, not every kind of conversation, but a lot of different situations, being a little messy, being comfortable with things not following a standard
Yeah.
script, and being agile and adaptable to different situations, right?
I think like
Yeah,
you this morning we were just having that conversation because we read a lot of, we have been reading a lot of
yeah,
communication related books from something from like the 70s to something that was written literally this year, last year.
yeah. This
Actually,
year,
no, it
last
was
year,
last year.
last year.
From different both academic scientists to journalists to, more to lawyers and
Mm,
different perspectives.
absolutely.
And we kind of came to realize that it's easy to kind of put it nicely in a book,
In a book, yeah.
and it's just like, this is how you should navigate a difficult conversation
Mm,
or like to navigate this and that.
yeah,
But when it comes to applying it into real life, it needs to become messy. And
yeah,
even if it doesn't go exactly like how the book said, it
yeah,
doesn't mean that you made a mistake or you
yeah,
failed at this. And that's a really important thing that you need to really think about.
yeah.
You're trialing things. And you use an analogy in jujitsu that I really liked. Do you mind
Yeah.
sharing?
Yeah. So in obviously in jujitsu, there's always this really hilarious moment where the coach will demonstrate the move. So, all right, today we're going to do this. And, you kind of start like this position, right? We're all watching. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. And then we all kind of clap in unison. And then your partner and yourself, you try kind of like figuring out what just happened. You're like, wait a minute, does the arm kind of go this way? Or where are my hips, right? And then the coach goes around and you realize how horrifically wrong you got it, because it turns out you missed about 5 really important details. And jujitsu, it's all about details.
Yeah.
It's the little details
It's
that
like
make a world of
easier
difference.
scene that you're looking at it going, "Oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, yep, no problem." And then you do it, you're like,
And then usually there's sparring, right? Or rolling. You want to practice the moves in semi real time conditions. We're not in the competition, but usually it's pretty brisk. It's pretty intense. You roll with your partner and you got the whole setup up here. You're like, okay,
Mhm.
today I'm going to really hone in on the techniques and the sequences that we did. And then you're like, wait a minute, this is a moving, flailing human body that's also trying to pass me and
Yeah.
submit me, choke me, whatever, right?
I remember you said in your most recent competition, it's like you had planned out, this is plan A, plan B, plan C. If things
Mm,
went this way, if they move this way, I'm gonna go this way. So it's
yeah.
like it's important to have a plan. But then when you're there, you just threw everything out the window and just focused in the moment. And you probably, I remember you shared like you did things that you didn't plan and it actually worked out
Yeah.
surprisingly well.
Well, I think what happened is I realized that the plan, it's a plan. Like you're trying to execute something,
And it's important to
and it's
have that.
important to have one, but it's more like a repertoire, like an inventory
Yeah.
of things that I have up here.
Mm.
Like, okay, well, we're gonna, again, for those that don't know jujitsu, but you start standing up and you want to do takedowns. So try to bring the person down to score 2 points, and then you want to try to maneuver your way around them. So I was like, I'm gonna try these takedowns, and then if I go to the ground, this is gonna happen. And I was pretty happy with the points I was able to score, but like 60% didn't go according to plan. But there's still the frames, the sort of the
Mm.
repertoire of strategies and pathways up here. And I was thinking about a lot of the communication books that we've been reading. They're wonderful resources because they get you to realize, managing your emotions under
Mm.
pressure, trying to disentangle conversations from like people. Like you're having a conversation with someone, you
Mm.
want to separate the person from the problem or the issue that's being discussed.
Yeah.
You don't want to get emotional, you don't want to personalize it. Then how do you connect with someone on the
Yeah.
level of like eye contact, body
Mm.
language, setting the scene so that the person feels comfortable and safe, or at least we're both vulnerable now, so we can kind of get down to a
Yeah.
level that's appropriate. All of that sounds really great on paper, and I think the intention of a lot of these authors is to give us that repertoire, to give us that kind of inventory of tricks and stock phrases and
Yeah.
ways to kind of manage yourself in high stakes conversations. But you also have to be okay that It's messy.
Yeah.
You're probably going to fail. You're probably not going to,
Do it
do
perfectly.
it perfectly. Some of these books, they often say, if you're going to focus on something, focus on just a handful of things.
Yeah.
Don't try everything in the
Yeah.
book.
No, I do like the word repertoire. I think a lot of like for me, I do tend to I'm learning to be better. I'm a Taurus. So like if you guys
A
are really
tortoise.
into like zodiac or
No,
whatever, but
Taurus, sorry.
what?
I thought you said tortoise, like
A
the turtle.
tortoise.
Yeah.
I'm a turtle. No, it's like in Asian cultures, we like to talk about personality types and their connection
Mm,
to different zodiac signs.
yeah.
And so they say that as a Taurus, you're very stubborn-headed and you're very focused on kind of
Mm,
like a bull.
yeah.
Once you find your direction, you're just gonna keep charging in that direction, and it's really hard to turn.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to change our
Yes.
minds, right? And so for me, I think I see a lot of things as black and white.
Yes.
I remember distinctively, I would look at these books and I have to do it like this, especially when I was a coach. When I
Mm,
was a coach, I would read books on like exercise science and anatomy, different things. And I would literally study it
yeah.
down to the T of like the mechanics of how the muscles or to the
Mm,
bone structure, different ratios, femur length, and how it affects the
yeah.
squat and things like that. And in a way that it made me a very effective coach,
Mm,
but at the same time, I often felt like if I wasn't doing it like this exactly laid out, then I have failed or I am
yes.
not good enough and things
Yes.
like that. But seeing it now, learning to see things more as a repertoire, as like, let's just try it. Let's
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been really helpful.
No, it is, and I think when we first met, you've always been my coach in many different aspects of life. But like, I remember the amount of coaching you gave me for Olympic weightlifting. It's like all these little details. I'm just, oh my god, okay, my shoulders are going to go back, and my lats are like this, and I'm going to hold on to the bar like this, and it's just like it does kind of overwhelm your mind. You're like,
Mm.
my god, like, am I doing anything right? Just like yoga, like our yoga teacher, we have the same yoga teacher. It's like everything from the breathing to the way you position your hips. And like today we were just working on the arch of my foot
You
and
don't
like,
have an
which I
arch.
don't have an arch, like activating this. And it's just, yeah, it feels in the moment, it feels like a total catastrophe, but it's like,
Mm.
actually, no, you're sort of putting in the work and
You're
eventually,
actually progressing, and that's the
yeah.
thing. It's just that when you start not focusing so much on the end result
Mm,
or what you expect success or the result should look like, which is kind of what you brought up earlier. You said like focusing on the process, falling
yeah.
in love with the process as
Yeah.
opposed to focusing so much on the end goal, on the result,
Yeah.
if you will.
No, absolutely.
I think is so crucial because like you said, yoga. It's just like, oh my god,
It's help.
for people who are quite athletic who've done multiple
Yeah.
sports, we're like, what is this?
FYI, it's not yoga in the traditional kind of yoga studio or hot yoga or I don't want the cliched like Lululemon style
Yeah, no,
yoga.
it's like imagine like a Chinese woman yelling at you,
Yeah,
like
it's
do it,
awesome.
come on.
Yeah,
And I guess that's our style, and we
yeah,
respond well to that. And so
yeah,
not like in a berating way, just like in a very
yeah,
passionately encouraging way. Just like, come on, more, stay there. Okay, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
great.
Stop straining your leg. Straighten your leg.
It's just hard because, like, for the decade and a half, no, 2 decades, we've been in the gym, we've been in CrossFit weightlifting, and that's kind of how it's a lot of yelling,
So
like,
yeah,
"Come on, one more rep. Don't give up, get up."
yeah, yeah. No, no, for sure. And some people respond really well to that. Others, maybe not. But still,
Yeah,
I think it's yeah. So like, success is messy. It's nonlinear. It's a whole bunch of different pathways, and you have to embrace that and accept that. And then along the way, give yourself a lot of grace, but
mhm,
also give yourself like maybe a handful of things that you need to deliberately practice and
yeah,
refine to get to the next level. To zero in on communication. So number one, focusing on your physiology, your breath, your body awareness, right? Am I unnecessarily tense? Are my nerves really high? What can I do to kind of bring myself down before the fact? How do I regulate those nerves during the fact? But more importantly, after the fact, how do I think about the experience as part of that rerouting? Like, okay, so how was my body? Was I really nervous? Was I visibly shaken? Was I, seemingly, yeah, kind of a nervous train wreck to the other person? If so, okay, cool. Well, what little actionable steps that I can take so I can make the journey a little bit smoother. So that's number one, having that physiological awareness, but understanding that you can't be this perfectly Zen like creature in these high stakes moments.
Well, it's more like you can't expect to be like that right off the bat. You see those really zen-like creatures, zen-like
Humans.
people, they have been doing this for a very long time. You don't see their failures. What you see is a curated
Mm,
version of their story,
yeah,
and you only focus on their success. But they don't, it's not like people don't like to hear failures, but people do gravitate more
yeah,
towards success stories than
yeah,
failure stories. But I think it's important to occasionally look at how people have failed and,
yes,
how they have in turn used that opportunity as data to how they can better improve, or they accidentally just stumbled upon this oasis that they otherwise would have not found.
yeah, exactly. And I think that especially probably the hardest thing to get a handle on is your like physiological reaction to stressful situations or conversations. That there's a lot you can do, but the body on a brain and hormonal level will take over in ways that really defy our rational expectations of what if I do more breath work, or what if I calm myself down through positive affirmations. Like some of that works, and I'm sure there's a way to at least 30-40% of the nerves can be evacuated through minor kind of adjustments.
Well,
But
like I want to share a quick story before we close up. When I always share the story with my students in drama and acting and all that stuff, and I tell them I'm like, you think I'm very confident and very, I wasn't
mm,
always like this. I remember when I was in acting school or in college, I would just like shake so much.
mm,
And it was to a point where like I would literally feel I'd be singing the song. I'm like, all right, I've done my breath work. I tried to regulate and like, oh no, it's here it comes. Here it comes. I feel from the back of my head, it starts shaking to a
mm,
point where I couldn't control my voice and my entire
mm,
head was just shaking.
yeah,
And by the time I graduated, I kept working on that, kind of using what you were saying to focus on something that is so immediately important to me to work on.
yeah,
So over a course of 2 years, I really worked on that. But by my graduation recital, I had to do a 40-minute one woman show that we had to
yeah,
write and direct and act, obviously, and sing. And I was pretty good at regulating my nerves by then, but it was still a
yeah,
thing. And so what did I do? I channeled that into this nervous laugh. Every time I felt that coming, I go, and so that, in the end, became something that was the most memorable for the judging panel as well as the audience. I got a
mm,
standing ovation by the end.
mm,
My head of department, who throughout my time as a student was just like, okay, yeah, we'll see. She came backstage and gave me a big hug and said, now that's performance.
yeah,
And people thought that my nervous laugh was just part of the character that I was playing, but it was just me channeling that.
yeah,
And so if I was just like, no, good performance has to be like no nervous laughter,
yeah,
no nothing, you cannot show any signs that you're scared or nervous, then I wouldn't have, found this other character that
yeah.
I accidentally created that became the most memorable thing for
Yeah.
everyone.
And I think everyone has a unique kind of like physical signature to how they present or perform. And you just got to figure out what that is with whatever it is you have to deliver. And yeah, I think that's a great story because it again, you are going to limit yourself 5 or 6 or 7 different ways if you really think it has to follow this kind of script. I have students, for example, when they present, presentation based projects, right? I have students who really enjoy humor, who really enjoy an unnecessary amount of memes or meme like content in their slides. But I allow that. And the reason why I allow that is because, all right, well, look, humor is your style. You like to anchor delivery of your materials in goofy kind of middle and high school kind of humor, but try to strike that balance, try to have informed delivery plus a little bit of humor. And I think that there is like a lot of, yeah, people can find a lot of success
Yeah.
if they know what the right kind of style is.
And that is the differentiating factor. I believe it's a differentiating factor in this day and age with AI because
Mhm.
it's too easy to be perfect
Yeah.
or pristine or,
Yeah.
this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And now, it's kind of goofy that people are deliberately making mistakes to be like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, I did
Where's the
this. Where's
humanity?
the humanity?
Yeah.
And so I think it's perfect time that we talk about this because it's like you making mistakes or showing a bit of your flaws or experimenting different things. That's what's going to set you apart
Yeah.
and find your own personal flair.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone's going to look, sound the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think like ultimately the core message of this particular podcast is don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to, if you made a mistake in other people's eyes or even in your eyes, don't be quick to
Mm.
cover that. Explore with it, sit with it a little bit and be like, is there something kind of fun? And lean into it.
Yeah.
And there are times
Well,
where it's just like when it's a clear mistake that you should be like, nope, I should not
well,
touch that.
this you're
But
talking about exploration. This is my number two kind of trick or sort of repertoire frame, if you will. So if you're number one, you're thinking about your body and how you put yourself out there and what you sound like, right? But number two, it's like that openness to exploration.
hmm,
A GPS is an exploratory tool. You're trying to map that world, that big old world around you, and all those meandering kind of pathways and streets you haven't kind of looked at yet, and that unexpected missed exit, which turns into a nice surprise, which we know this doesn't happen with reality when you're on a
sometimes
highway.
it does.
Sometimes it does. But, being open to try new things. For example, say you're the kind of person who really talks a lot in a conversation and just likes to take over and suck out all the oxygen from the dynamic. Be more about asking questions. Be more comfortable about asking questions and being a better listener.
Hmm,
Like, oh, listening isn't really my thing. I want to be better at actively listening to the other person in front of me so
yeah.
I can craft a better dialogue with the person that I'm interacting with,
Mhm.
So that kind of exploratory thing where you're going off the beaten path, you're trying things that you haven't tried before. I think that's massively important. Or it could be like, I don't know, like what's another uncomfortable thing to put yourself in that would build up
Make
communication
new
skills?
friends. Go ask people
Yeah.
on a date.
Yeah,
That's uncomfortable,
people still do that, right?
I guess.
Yeah, but honestly, you're not the kind of person to socialize with others. You're not big on social gatherings. You're not big
Mhm.
on putting yourself out there and doing small talk chit chat.
Yeah. I'm definitely one of those. But I will say that a couple times where I was just like, you know what? I do need to challenge myself. Like, I'm not going to go to all the gatherings, but I'll go to some. And when I do, I was always pleasantly surprised with the kind of conversations I walk away with
Yeah.
and the kind of people that I meet and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
No, and I think that, it can be as mundane as that. Like the reps that you put in for presentations, for everyday conversations with friends or social outings, like that, like it builds that experience, that data, right? And I think the last thing I would say is if you're gonna be in a car and you're gonna be like looking at the GPS, you might as well stock the car full of supplies.
Plus, pee bags, plastic bags.
We had pee bags once upon, not for us, for our daughters, but you never know. But yeah, no, I feel like, if you are to prepare for a journey, you might as well like make the most of your preparation. So reading communication books that
Well, it
are
goes back to kind of building your repertoire.
building your repertoire. Like, okay, maybe there are books out there that'll boost the amount of stock phrases you can use to sound more assertive, to be more concise, to, structure presentations in a more structured way, right? Like having all sorts of different outlines of how you can spontaneously do speeches or toasts or other occasions where you need to kind of speak off the cuff.
So, as we wrap up this episode, I want to challenge you with a question. Who said you had to be this way?
Yeah.
I think that sometimes you should just be comfortable with asking yourself and challenge the norm. You don't have to go up to, your boss or whatever and just be like, who said so?
And think not in outcomes, think in processes or think
Yeah.
in frames or repertoires. I know I use that word, but yeah, there are little boxes of things that can live in your head that you can just have on hand. So when the opportunities arise, you can be
Yeah.
like, okay,
Almost like a little toolbox.
it's a tool.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just keep collecting things, try it. This doesn't work. All right, let's try something else. And then
Yeah.
eventually you'll find your groove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So
does your communication toolkit look like? Let us know.
let
Be
us know
happy to
in the
find out.
comments. I don't know if that what would they put out in the comments? Would they just like put down like spanner, wrench, spatula?
We got like the metaphorical
Meta-
tools.
I feel like there are stories out there.
Sure.
please feel free to share your story of how you might have gone off the beaten path and what kind of surprising things that have happened to you.
Yes.
Please share them in the comments so that not just we know, but also other people who are watching this or listening to this could also feel like, hey, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
And you might just encourage someone to take that step. All right, that's all for today. See you in the next episode.
Bye.